Has this ever happened to you before? You extract from a long and tumultuous dungeon delve and finally got your hands on a legendary piece of equipment only for it to be worth less than a piece of cloth? Well then, this is the guide for you. A big question for a lot of novice or even adept players is, what rolls make gear good? Oftentimes, rolls will increase the value of items significantly more than the rarity, making uncommons even more expensive than their legendary counterparts. This is also partly due to the gear score brackets, but I'll touch on that a bit later. I was going to break this video into sections based off tiers, but I'm pretty sure most of you would just skip to the Bis tier. So I'm just going to go over the best rolls first, then briefly touch on situational and worst in slot tiers after. Starting out first in the Bis tier, we have all attributes. This is the absolute most desirable roll to have on any piece of jewelry. It'll instantly 2 to 3x, if not more, the price of any piece. Being the only roll unable to be slotted by the goldsmith is the reason why it's such a pricey enchantment, along with it being just an incredible stat boost for just about any class. True physical and magical damage is the runner-up for making any item instant Bis. True damage is such a crucial stat to so many classes and builds that it's worth paying the extra penny. The price has been slightly reduced along with the introduction of the goldsmith, however, allowing for a cheaper alternative. Max health is something every class wants, making it universally a good roll, regardless of what piece it's on. The flat health rolls are typically the most expensive because of how scaling works, but Vig is also an equally desirable roll. Additional move speed and move speed bonus is another enchantment that everybody wants to have on their boots. If I see a pair of boots without this roll, they're essentially useless in my eyes. Additional weapon damage makes just about any weapon that much more expensive. However, it's important to look at the base roll of the weapon, because if you get a low base roll with the additional weapon damage roll, it's basically the same as just the weapon damage with a high base roll and no additional weapon damage enchantment. I just want to preface this tier by saying that most of the stuff is heavily gear dependent. Matching rolls with the class that uses the specific gear is very important. A fighter isn't going to pay more for a knowledge roll on his armor, or a wizard may pay a significant amount for said roll on his leather cap. Just keep this in mind when I go over these rolls. For all other individual stat rolls, just keep in mind what I said in the preface. Melee classes like Strength and Dex, caster classes like Knowledge and Will. Action speed is just worse dex. It'll increase the cost of most melee gear marginally. Additional armor rating and PDR is especially expensive on fighter plate gear. Additional memory capacity and memory capacity bonus only ever makes some bard instruments more expensive, so keep an eye out for that. Additional magic resistance and MDR isn't as expensive as the previous entry, but is still desirable at some level. Additional physical damage and additional magical damage is basically the budget version of true damage. It'll still sell for a bit, but it's not as desirable as true because it's affected by resistances. I find armor pen to really only be more expensive on rogue gear, or maybe barb gear in some niche cases, but it's a roll that I don't mind having as an extra. It'll maybe marginally increase the price of some items. Buff duration is actually pretty underrated. It's got some really good interactions with skills and spells, but it won't typically increase the price of any item by too much. Luck. Is it real? Does it actually do anything? Well, I'm not here to answer that, but it'll typically increase the price of an item in some cases. Magic power and magic damage bonus are essentially the same thing. It'll increase the price of cast weapons and gear a bit. Max health bonus is budget additional max health. Doesn't sell for as much because the flat health increase is typically better for most classes. Physical healing and magical healing can be insanely lucrative. It's just very gear dependent. Magic healing on an arming sword ain't worth a dime, but on a phoenix choker, it's worth a dozen. Physical power and physical damage bonus, similarly to its magic counterpart, are the same thing. It'll substantially increase the price of most melee classes' gear and weapons. Regular and magical interaction speed isn't currently in the game as far as I'm aware, but I think it's kind of an underrated stat. It's sort of just a nice convenience stat to have on gear. Spellcasting speed is just worse knowledge. It'll increase the price of most casting gear that can't roll knowledge. And finally, the worst in slot tier. Debuff duration, magic penetration, and projectile damage reduction don't even deserve the breath it would take to talk about them. They're bad because they lacked effectiveness. Simple as. Well, this is the final results for the quote-unquote tier list. They're not really in any specific order because of the variance between different gear and items, but hopefully this guide helps you distinguish between what's Bis and what's Piss. Anyways, best of luck in the dungeon, and have a good night.